Hello everyone, my name is Sara Strassel. I'm a senior in the College of Arts and Sciences studying statistics, and my project is titled Designing Impactful Aid Programs for Smallholder Coffee Farmers. My project advisor is Professor Rebecca Nichols in the Questrom School of Business. So I'd like to begin with a little background on the state of the coffee industry from the perspective of smallholder farmers. So around the world, more than 50 million people depend on coffee as their primary source of income, and of those, 12 million are smallholder farmers, who are farmers that own and operate on less than 5 hectares or about 12 acres of land. We can think of them as the small businesses of the coffee growing industry. So these farmers produce about 60% of the world's coffee supply. However, about half of them live below the international poverty line. In addition, smallholder farmers struggle to adapt to market downturns, so the price of coffee is constantly fluctuating as a commodity, and along with expensive initial investments required to farm coffee, there's a number of economic challenges that make it difficult to seek out alternative crops or supplementary sources of income. Along with the economic factors, climate change also proposes a number of unpredictable growing conditions, including coffee plant diseases, droughts, etc. So knowing the number of challenges it takes to farm coffee, there's a number of existing aid programs that are out there for coffee farmers. Through my literature review, I examined several different programs, identified some strengths and weaknesses among the existing programs, and compared them to one another. And from my research, I drew my main conclusion that the priority of partnerships with farmers and the importance of communication between organizations and farmers ultimately makes the greatest impact on farmers' lives. From my research, I developed an evaluation rubric that can be used to better compare these programs with one another and see how they perform overall against a number of criteria. Additionally, I emphasized the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals in my research, particularly these 4 I have listed here. So let's take a look at some existing programs and how they align their resources. So I've divided their resources into 3 different categories: financial aid, agricultural practices, and community enrichment. So as you can see, most programs have a little bit of comprehensive aid, but there is a tendency towards providing financial aid as the primary source of aid provided to the farmers. However, this financial aid is not enough to make a long-term impact on the farmers' lives. So looking at some strengths and weaknesses of existing programs, one really big strength that I'm going to focus on more in my project is the consultation with farmers. When these programs are getting into the field and speaking directly with the farmers, taking their opinions into consideration and integrating them into their programs, they ultimately make a greater impact and a long-term benefit on farmers' lives. Additionally, programs that have some sort of long-term impact monitoring that can extend beyond the duration of their program help to integrate more tangible results and create a better impact for farmers. And finally, as we saw in the last Venn diagram, farmers that focus on this multifaceted resources so that they integrate more different types of aid, including a mix of financial aid, agricultural resources, and community enrichment, ultimately end up making a greater impact as their aid is more comprehensive. And some weaknesses that we can see between the existing programs are the tendency to follow a profit-driven approach. When programs go in with the idea that the number one way to fix these programs is to improve the profit margins of farmers, they tend to miss out on a lot of underlying needs. As we'll see on the next slide, there's a big promotion of the importance of education for farmers' children and other ideas that might not come up when we just look at how they're struggling economically. So I wanted to highlight a couple quotes from my research that really emphasize the needs that are under the surface when we look beyond just a financial aid approach. So from the 4C Certification Board, which is similar to fair trade in that they look at labor standards, environmental regulations, etc., one farmer in their organization said, "Training must achieve a positive outcome for the households to ensure long-lasting impact. Direct investments, including new varieties of coffee plants and improved agricultural practices such as intercropping, are largely missing." Not only does this program highlight what's missing from existing aids, they did so through consulting directly with farmers instead of making assumptions about their aids based on solely their economic standpoint. So as a result of my research, I wanted to put together a really clear and easy to follow resource that would allow for this cross comparison that I found a bit challenging in my research. So I've created an evaluation rubric that highlights 3 categories of aid: community engagement, financial sustainability and market access, and long-term impact. So each of these categories is broken down into smaller headings, which receive a score out of 5, and each larger category has a performance indicator that we can see on the bottom left. So I'd like to highlight a couple companies that score differently, but I'd like to point out that not every company and not any company will score perfect, as this is sort of an overview and we want to see how they perform across the different types of aid. So one company I'd like to highlight is called TechnoServe. The specific case study that I looked at was a partnership program that they run with McDonald's, which is a very large buyer of coffee around the world. Their program is unique in that they offer good agricultural practices training to farmers, and they train community leaders that already have existing partnerships with farmers, so they have this sort of established trust between the community members and farmers. And additionally, they're able to deliver these programs in the local languages as opposed to just Spanish. So this program definitely scores well in the community engagement and the long-term impact, just from the framework of their program and the approach that they take. In the design of their program, they used a pre-existing framework that they used in the past, but they also consulted with farmers to see if this program will work well for them and to see what they can add in to make the program work best for this specific community. This program also scores well in the financial sustainability category as a result of this comprehensive aid, as they were able to improve the income for farmers by 35%. So overall, this program was scored very well. It's important to know that they might have lower scores in a couple of the smaller categories, but this shouldn't diminish the overall positive impact of this company. Another program I'd like to highlight that takes a more one-sided approach is Fairtrade International. I'm sure we've all seen the little Fairtrade logo on coffee bags or chocolate bars at the grocery store, and Fairtrade offers a pretty straightforward approach, and they offer a series of criteria. In return, they offer a higher price premium for coffee farmers. So these prices, however, have been very stagnant over the past 10 years. They were only just raised in the last month and had not been raised in the past 11 years. So while this program would score well in the financial sustainability in that they foster farmer-buyer relationships and they offer prices that are aimed at increasing income, they would not be likely to score as high in the community engagement or the long-term impact. Their program really focuses on what can be done now instead of looking at the future and the continuity of the industry. So to conclude, I really want to emphasize this importance of integrating communication and conversation with farmers into these programs and how it can create impact not only for the farmers, but for the entire supply chain of the coffee industry. So when we have these standardized guidelines and these ideas of what farmers want to be integrated into these programs and what's actually being integrated, it's creating value for not only the farmers, but for the producers and the buyers along the supply chain. Additionally, when companies are taking part in these initiatives, they're able to better align with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as they're working to alleviate not only economic disparity, but also climate change and poverty as a whole. Thank you.
So in regard to these programs and the frameworks that they propose, has there been any opposition to any types of frameworks that they've put forth, and what has been the response to that, if there has been?
Yeah, I think if any, the opposition comes from the farmers when they're directly asked. One of the sources I looked at was a book written by an anthropologist who went down to Guatemala and was speaking directly with farmers and being able to hear that feedback one-on-one and not having it be in like a corporate or transactional setting. They were able to disclose that, I can actually go back to a quote, that there's often this reluctance to expose opposition to these programs because they're all well-intentioned, it's just they're not exactly making the impact that they do.
Thanks. So this is a great presentation. What were your motivations in choosing coffee to detail this?
So I've worked in the retail side of coffee for most of my college years, and I think I'm definitely one of the biggest consumers of coffee in this industry, but I think I wrote a paper sophomore year for 301 in Kilachand on the climate change side, and when I was trying to put together my Keystone, I really wanted to see how I could go beyond that, and besides, you can read a ton about climate change in any industry, but really the part that I found the most rewarding and most like that I'm going to take away from this is the relationships with these farmers, because you'll see pictures in ad campaigns from Starbucks or Dunkin' that these are the people that you're supporting, but actually being able to learn from resources that learn from them was really beneficial for me.
Thank you. Sarah, this is really, really interesting. Thank you. I wonder if you have any advice for those of us who worry a lot about what food we buy, what products we buy, and what impact it has on people. How do you not get taken in by those little logos, right, that say like, oh, fair, this is done well, because it seems like you've partly exposed that that's not always the reality behind it. So I wonder like about your consumer choices, and then what advice you would have for people who always think of it as like, I want to buy food that isn't hurting the people who produced it, right?
Yeah, no, I definitely, as I've gone through this project, I notice it a lot more. And I think just going beyond seeing a little label or something you're familiar with and actually familiarizing yourself with what these organizations are doing and how, just really looking into the impact that they have, like beyond the impact they're trying to make, and how these programs impact their target population is really the most important part. And I think it's definitely good to look for these types of programs when we're making consumer choices, but just going a step beyond that and being like educating ourselves on what these programs are actually doing rather than just recognizing the positive intention.
Thank you. I'm also a coffee drinker, so this was also very interesting to me. Did you encounter any programs that were giving farmers sort of more control over the kinds of support they got, or that were like reaching out to ask for their input into what kinds of help was being provided to them?
Yeah, I think what I saw overall in the programs that were more successful in creating that positive change was that integration of conversation and like community involvement. So rather than having like a hands-off approach, having an all hands-on approach where everyone's involved and the people who are able to allocate these resources are making less of the decisions, but it's more of like a collective impact.
Thank you so much for your presentation.